Rising tide of desperation. The emergency klaxons aboard the Alliance flagship Celestial Harmony blared for the third time that day. Admiral Navari, her crystalline exoskeleton glinting under the harsh emergency lights, moved with practiced precision through the organized chaos of the command deck. Reports flooded in from across the battle grid, each one worse than the last. "Status report," she commanded, her multifaceted eyes scanning the holographic battle map. Lieutenant Commander Tsel, a stocky Braxian with mottled blue skin, stepped forward. "The Vex have broken through our defensive line at Sector 7. 3 cruisers lost, 5 more heavily damaged. They're pushing toward the Epsilon colonies." Admiral Navari's antennae twitched in frustration. This was the 4th major engagement in 2 months, and the 4th decisive defeat. The Vex, a hive-minded species of ruthlessly efficient warriors, were advancing steadily through Alliance territory, their quantum-phase ships seemingly impervious to conventional weaponry. "We need to face facts," said General Vrexel, the Tauri representative to the Alliance War Council. His massive, bull-like frame dwarfed the other officers present. "Our current strategy has failed. If we don't change course immediately, the Epsilon colonies will fall within days." Navari knew he was right, but the alternative filled her with unease. "You're suggesting we bring in the humans," she stated flatly. The command deck fell silent. Humans were the newest members of the Galactic Alliance, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 70 years ago. They were unpredictable, chaotic, and operated on principles that often baffled the more established species. But they were also undeniably effective in combat. Their battleships specifically, Vrexel confirmed. "We've avoided deploying them thus far, but we're out of options. Those ships violate half the protocols established in the Galactic Warfare Conventions," Navari countered. "They're unstable, unpredictable, and dangerous to everyone in the vicinity, including their own crews. They're also the only vessels that have ever successfully engaged Vex warships and survived," a new voice interjected. All eyes turned to the entrance of the command deck where a human diplomat stood. Ambassador Marcus Delaney represented Earth on the Alliance Council, a position earned through political savvy rather than military experience. He was tall for a human, with dark skin and a closely cropped beard flecked with silver. "Ambassador Delaney," Navari acknowledged with a formal gesture of respect. "This is a military matter." "With all due respect, Admiral," Delaney replied, approaching the battle map, "when your military options are exhausted, it becomes a diplomatic one. The Vex will not negotiate. They never have. If the Epsilon colonies fall, millions will die." Navari's antennae flattened against her head. "And how many will die if we bring human battleships into this conflict? Have you seen what happens when one of those monstrosities malfunctions?" "I have," Delaney said quietly. "I was at the Battle of Proxima Centauri. I saw what our ships can do, both the good and the bad. But right now, the Alliance needs every advantage it can get." Before Navari could respond, the holographic display flashed red, and a communications officer called out, "Admiral. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Fleet Command." "Put it through," Navari ordered, mandibles clicking in irritation. The holographic display shifted, revealing the weathered face of Admiral Darius Reeves, Supreme Commander of Earth's fleet. Unlike most human military leaders, Reeves had extensive experience working with alien species. His reputation for brutal honesty and tactical brilliance had earned him respect across the Alliance, even from those who distrusted humans. "Admiral Navari," Reeves greeted her with a curt nod. "I'll skip the pleasantries. We've received your reports on the Vex advance. Earth is prepared to commit its battleship divisions to the conflict, effective immediately." Navari's mandibles twitched, the equivalent of a human frown. "Admiral Reeves, the Alliance has not formally requested human battleship support." "Not yet," Reeves acknowledged, "but you will. The question is whether you'll do it before or after the Epsilon colonies are reduced to radioactive ash. I've already dispatched the 7th Battleship Division to your coordinates. They'll arrive within 48 hours. General Vrexel stepped forward. That's a violation of Alliance Command protocols, Admiral Reeves. So court-martial me when this is over, Reeves replied without a hint of concern. The 7th Division is commanded by Captain Eleanor Wright on the UES Thunderchild. She's the best we have. Navari recognized the name. Eleanor Wright had gained notoriety 3 years ago during a skirmish with pirate vessels near the Orion Spur. Her unorthodox tactics had destroyed the pirate fleet but also caused significant damage to a nearby mining outpost. The incident had nearly sparked a diplomatic crisis. We cannot afford another Orion incident, Admiral, Navari warned. What you can't afford is to lose the Epsilon colonies, Reeves countered. Wright knows the stakes. She'll get the job done. Ambassador Delaney cleared his throat. Perhaps a compromise? The human battleships can be deployed, but under strict operational parameters agreed upon by both Alliance Command and Earth Fleet. Admiral Navari considered this. The situation was dire, and conventional tactics had proven ineffective against the Vex. Human battleships were dangerous and unpredictable, but so was extinction. Very well, she conceded finally. But I want a liaison officer aboard the Thunderchild. Someone who understands Alliance protocols and can moderate Captain Wright's more creative impulses. Reeves nodded. Acceptable. I suggest Ambassador Zolar. He's worked with Wright before and survived the experience. Navari's antennae twitched in surprise. Zolar was a respected Arcturian diplomat known for his unflappable demeanor and skill in navigating human customs. If anyone could keep Eleanor Wright in check, it was him. Make the arrangements, she ordered Lieutenant Commander Tsell. Turning back to the holographic image of Reeves, she added, but understand this, Admiral, if your battleships cause more harm than good, I will personally see to it that humanity's role in this alliance is permanently reconsidered. Reeves met her gaze unflinchingly. Fair enough. But when this is over, you might just thank us. The transmission ended, leaving the command deck in uneasy silence. Admiral, General Vrexel ventured, are you certain about this? Human battleships are known for their excessive approach to warfare. I'm certain of nothing except that we're losing this war, Navari replied grimly. Prepare the fleet to rendezvous with the human battleships. And may the stars have mercy on us all. 48 hours later, Ambassador Zolar stood in the docking bay of the Celestial Harmony, waiting for the shuttle that would transport him to the human battleship Thunderchild. As an Arcturian, he was physiologically similar to humans, bipedal, mammalian, with compatible atmospheric requirements, but his pale blue skin, elongated fingers, and large, pupilless eyes marked him as distinctly non-human. The docking bay doors slid open, revealing a rugged human shuttle. Unlike the sleek, organic curves of Alliance vessels, the human craft was all sharp angles and exposed machinery, with visible weld marks and patches on its hull. It looked, to Zolar's eyes, like it had been cobbled together from spare parts, which, knowing humans, it probably had been. The shuttle's ramp descended with a hydraulic hiss, and a human woman strode down it. Captain Eleanor Wright was shorter than Zolar had expected, with a sturdy build and close-cropped gray hair. A network of faded scars traced patterns across her weathered face, the mark of a career soldier who had seen more than her fair share of combat. Ambassador Zolar, she greeted him, extending a hand in the human custom. Welcome to the war. Zolar accepted the handshake, noting the calluses on her palm. Captain Wright. It's been some time. Orion Spur, 3 years ago, Wright nodded. You were diplomatic cleanup after my mess. An educational experience, Zolar replied diplomatically. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the command deck in momentary silence. You realize you've just confirmed her worst fears about human battleships, Zolar said quietly. Wright turned to face him, her expression hardened by years of combat. Better she fears us than underestimates us. Fear keeps people alive in war, Ambassador. Now, let me show you why human battleships are considered too dangerous for this conflict. 9 hours later, the combined Human Alliance fleet approached the Helios waypoint. The strategic location, a nexus of hyperspace lanes connecting multiple star systems, had fallen to the Vex 3 days earlier. Intelligence suggested they were converting it into a forward base for their push toward the Epsilon colonies. Zolar stood on the Thunderchild's observation deck, watching as the fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 7 human battleships, including the Thunderchild, formed the vanguard, their massive hulls bristling with weapons. Behind them, 23 Alliance vessels, sleeker, more elegant, but significantly less armed, moved into support positions. Commander Petrova joined him at the viewport. Impressive, isn't it? Terrifying, Zolar corrected. Your vessels appear to be designed specifically to overwhelm opponents with sheer firepower. Petrova nodded, pride evident in her voice. That's one way to put it. Alliance ships are built for efficiency and precision. Human battleships are built to win at any cost. And what cost will that be, Commander? Zolar asked softly. Before she could answer, the ship's intercom crackled. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Repeat, all hands to battle stations. Petrova's expression shifted instantly from conversational to professional. You should return to the command deck, Ambassador. The show's about to begin. When they arrived on the command deck, Captain Wright was already issuing orders, her voice clear and confident above the controlled chaos. Tactical, report. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, a dark-skinned man with close-cropped hair, responded immediately. Vex fleet detected around Helios Station. 27 vessels, including 3 dreadnoughts. They've detected our approach and are moving to intercept. As expected, Wright nodded. Communications, inform the Alliance vessels to maintain their distance as discussed. Weapons, prepare main batteries but hold fire until my command. Zolar moved to Wright's side. Captain, what exactly is your strategy here? The Vex outnumber us. Wright's eyes never left the tactical display. Numbers don't win battles, Ambassador. Position and firepower do. She pointed to the holographic representation of the waypoint. The Vex have adopted a standard defensive formation around Helios. It's effective against conventional attacks, but they've never faced human battleships before. She tapped a control, and the display zoomed in. We're going to execute what we call a thunder run. The battleships will form a spearhead and punch straight through their center, using our forward shields to absorb their initial salvos. Once we're inside their formation, we pivot and attack outward, forcing them to fire toward each other to hit us. Zolar analyzed the maneuver. That's suicidal. Your ships will be surrounded and outgunned. Surrounded, yes. Outgunned? Wright smiled grimly. That's where you're wrong. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, activate the Shiva protocols. Jackson's hands flew over his console. Shiva protocols active, Captain. Weapon interlocks disengaged. A series of red warning indicators illuminated across the command deck. Zolar felt his blood run cold as he realized what was happening. You're unlocking your restricted weapon systems, he said, his voice barely audible over the ship's battle preparations. That violates at least 7 articles of the Galactic Warfare Conventions. Only if we use them, Wright countered. For now, we're just ensuring they're available if needed. The Vex destroyed 3 colony worlds last month, Ambassador. 17 million civilians. They don't deserve the protection of conventions they themselves ignore. Before Zolar could protest further, the tactical officer announced, "Vex fleet in range in 30 seconds. All hands, brace for combat," Wright called out, settling into her command chair. "Engineering, divert additional power to forward shields. Weapons, target the lead Vex dreadnought. Standard kinetic packages only, for now." The Thunderchild shuddered as its massive engines propelled it forward, leading the arrow formation of human battleships directly toward the heart of the Vex fleet. On the view screen, the alien vessels grew larger, sleek, biomechanical constructs that moved with unnatural coordination. "They're firing," Jackson reported. The ship rocked as energy weapons impacted against its shields. Warning klaxons blared, but Wright remained calm, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Hold course. Return fire, main batteries only." The Thunderchild bucked as its forward guns unleashed a barrage of hypervelocity projectiles. Unlike the energy weapons favored by most species, human battleships relied primarily on kinetic munitions, massive shells accelerated to relativistic speeds. The effect was devastating. The lead Vex dreadnought's forward section crumpled under the impact, atmosphere venting into space from multiple breaches. But the alien vessel didn't retreat. Instead, it adjusted its position, bringing secondary weapons to bear. "Second salvo incoming," Jackson warned. This time, the impact was far more severe. The Thunderchild lurched violently, and several consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Emergency lighting flickered on as primary systems momentarily faltered. "Damage report," Wright demanded, gripping her chair as the ship stabilized. "Forward shields at 42%, Petrova reported, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 9, emergency bulkheads holding. Weapon systems still operational." Zolar clung to a support railing, watching in horror and fascination as the human crew responded to conditions that would have sent Alliance personnel into panic. There was no fear on their faces, only determination and a strange, almost predatory focus. "We're inside their formation," Jackson announced triumphantly. "Execute pivot maneuver," Wright ordered. "All ships, attack pattern Omega. Weapons, switch to proximity detonation packages." The battleship groaned as its massive bulk rotated, thrusters firing in precise sequence. The human battleships, however, fired in all directions, their kinetic projectiles tearing through the lighter Vex vessels with horrifying efficiency. "Vex fleet is attempting to regroup," Jackson reported, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "They're breaking formation." "As expected," Wright nodded. "They rely on coordinated attacks. When forced to fight individually, they lose cohesion." She leaned forward. "Now for the coup de grace. Weapons, prepare the Prometheus system." A hush fell over the command deck. Even the human crew seemed unsettled by this order. "Captain," Commander Petrova said cautiously, "the Prometheus system has never been field-tested in actual combat conditions. The risk of collateral damage is acceptable given the circumstances," Wright finished firmly. "The Alliance fleet is well outside the effective radius, and there are no civilian assets in this sector. This is exactly the scenario the system was designed for." Zolar stepped forward. "Captain Wright, as Alliance liaison, I must formally protest this action. The Prometheus system, whatever it is, has not been cleared by Alliance command." Wright regarded him steadily. "Noted, Ambassador. Your protest will be logged in the official record." She turned back to her weapons officer. "Prepare the system." Jackson worked his console with practiced efficiency. "Prometheus system online, Captain. Target acquisition complete. Awaiting final authorization." Wright inserted a key from around her neck into a slot on her command chair. A small panel opened, revealing a biometric scanner. She pressed her palm against it, and a series of coded confirmations flashed across her personal display. "Prometheus system authorized," she said calmly. "Execute." For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then Zolar noticed a strange distortion emanating from the Thunderchild and the other human battleships, a rippling effect in space itself, like heat waves above desert sand. The effect expanded rapidly, engulfing the Vex fleet. Their ships began to shudder, their movements becoming erratic. Systems failed across their formation, weapons powering down, engines sputtering and dying. "What is this?" Zolar whispered, transfixed by the sight. "The Prometheus system," Wright explained, her voice low with a mixture of pride and regret. "A quantum field generator that temporarily alters the fundamental constants of physics within its radius. It's calibrated specifically to affect Vex technology while leaving our systems intact." Zolar turned to her in shock. "You've weaponized the laws of physics themselves?" "We adapted what we learned from studying Vex quantum technology," Wright corrected. "They use quantum entanglement for their hive-mind coordination. We found a way to disrupt it." On the view screen, the Vex fleet was in disarray. Without their coordination, individual vessels drifted helplessly or fired at random, their shots going wide. "All ships, conventional weapons free," Wright commanded. "Disable their engines and weapons systems only. I want prisoners for interrogation." The human battleships opened fire again, this time with surgical precision, targeting propulsion and weapons arrays. One by one, the Vex vessels went dark, powerless and adrift in space. "Vex fleet neutralized," Captain Jackson reported, unable to keep the triumph from his voice. "Minimal casualties on our side. 3 Alliance vessels damaged, but no critical failures." Wright nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Secure from general quarters. Launch recovery teams to the disabled Vex vessels. I want their command and control systems intact for analysis." As the tension on the command deck eased, crew members exchanged congratulatory gestures. The first major victory against the Vex in months had been achieved with surprising ease, thanks to human ingenuity in weaponry. But Zolar felt no celebration. He stared at the disabled Vex fleet, understanding for the first time why human battleships were considered too dangerous for conventional warfare. The Prometheus system was unlike anything he had ever encountered, a weapon that didn't destroy its targets but rendered them helpless by changing the very rules of reality. "Now you understand," Wright said quietly, coming to stand beside him. "Human warfare isn't about following established protocols or adhering to gentlemen's agreements. It's about survival, by any means necessary. The Alliance will demand an explanation for this technology," Zolar replied. "They'll want safeguards, restrictions." Wright's expression hardened. "They can demand whatever they want. But the Vex are still out there, and they're adapting even now. This victory buys us time, nothing more." "And what happens when the Vex develop countermeasures to your Prometheus system?" Zolar asked. "What terrifying new weapon will humanity unleash then?" Wright's smile held no humor, only grim determination. "That's the thing about humans, Ambassador. We never run out of ideas, especially when it comes to war." As the Thunderchild moved to secure the Helios waypoint, Zolar gazed out at the stars, a profound unease settling over him. The Alliance had invited titans of steel and fury into their conflict, unleashing forces they barely understood. The human battleships had brought victory, yes, but at what cost to the established order of galactic warfare? And more importantly, what would happen when this war was over, and these titans still roamed the stars, armed with weapons that could change reality itself, the price of victory? The Alliance Council chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia buzzed with angry voices. Representatives from 17 species sat around the massive circular table, all talking over one another in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and guttural sounds. At the center of the room, a holographic display showed footage from the Battle of Helios, specifically, the moment when the human battleships had activated the Prometheus system. Admiral Navari stood at the head of the table, her crystalline exoskeleton catching the light as she raised all four arms for silence. Gradually, the noise subsided. "The facts are incontrovertible," she stated, her mandibles clicking in agitation. Captain Wright and the Human Battleship Division deployed an unauthorized weapons system that fundamentally alters the laws of physics within its radius of effect. This technology was neither disclosed to nor approved by Alliance Command. And yet, rumbled General Vrexel, the massive Tauri representative, it achieved in one engagement what our combined fleets failed to accomplish in months of conventional warfare. The Helios waypoint is secure. The Vex advance has been halted. At what cost? Demanded Councillor Treesnax, the Medusan delegate. His gelatinous form pulsed with agitation. This Prometheus system violates at least 12 provisions of the Galactic Warfare Conventions. What happens when the Vex develop countermeasures? Will the humans deploy something even more destructive? Where does it end? Ambassador Marcus Delaney listened to the debate with practiced patience. As Earth's representative to the Alliance, he had expected this reaction. Humans had always been viewed with a mixture of fascination and fear by the older species. Their tendency to solve problems with brute force rather than elegant solutions made them unpredictable allies. Ambassador Delaney, Navari addressed him directly. Perhaps you would care to explain why Earth felt justified in deploying such a weapon without proper authorization? Delaney rose from his seat, adjusting his formal diplomatic attire. At 57, he was considered young for his position, but decades of crisis management had given him an air of authority that commanded respect. "Admiral," he began, his deep voice carrying easily across the chamber, "the Prometheus system was developed specifically to counter Vex quantum technology. Its existence was classified at the highest levels to prevent intelligence leaks. Had we shared its specifications with the full Alliance Council, the Vex would have adapted before we could deploy it." "Convenient," hissed Councillor Syx, the Serpentine Ophidian representative. "And what other weapons have you humans kept hidden from your supposed allies?" Before Delaney could respond, the chamber doors slid open. Captain Eleanor Wright entered, accompanied by Ambassador Zolar. Wright had exchanged her battle-worn uniform for formal dress blues, but the effect was hardly diplomatic. She moved with the confident stride of a predator, eyes scanning the room with tactical assessment. "Captain Wright," Navari acknowledged coldly. "Your presence was not requested at this session." "Perhaps it should have been," Wright replied, stopping at the center of the chamber. "Since you're discussing my actions, I thought you might want actual facts rather than speculation." A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. Wright's directness bordered on insubordination by Alliance standards. "Captain," Delaney said warningly, "the Council is merely concerned about." "The Council is concerned about humanity upsetting the established order," Wright interrupted. "They're worried we'll win this war using methods they don't approve of, and that afterward, the balance of power will shift." The chamber fell silent. Wright had given voice to the unspoken fear lurking beneath the diplomatic posturing. Zolar stepped forward, his tall, slender form a stark contrast to Wright's compact intensity. "If I may address the Council," he requested formally. Admiral Navari gestured her assent. "I was present aboard the Thunderchild during the Battle of Helios," Zolar began. "I witnessed the deployment of the Prometheus system firsthand. While I share your concerns about unauthorized weapons technology, I must also acknowledge its effectiveness. The system disabled rather than destroyed the Vex fleet, allowing us to capture intact vessels and, more importantly, Vex command personnel for interrogation." "And what have we learned from these interrogations?" asked General Vrexel. Wright stepped forward. "The Vex are preparing for a major offensive against the Proxima Relay. According to our prisoners, they plan to deploy a new class of dreadnought equipped with planet-killing capabilities. A wave of alarm spread through the chamber. "How reliable is this intelligence?" demanded Counselor Treesnax. "Verified by 3 separate Vex commanders under isolated questioning," Wright replied. "The offensive begins in 72 hours. If they take the Proxima Relay, they'll have an unobstructed path to the core worlds, including Earth and Arcturia." Zolar observed the Council's reaction. Fear was replacing outrage, just as Wright had intended. The human captain understood that nothing united disparate factions like a common threat. Admiral Navari's antennae twitched in agitation. "If this intelligence is accurate, we must prepare a defensive force immediately. The Alliance fleet is still recovering from previous engagements," General Vrexel noted. "We can muster perhaps 30 vessels within the time frame." "Not enough," Wright said flatly. "The Vex will have at least twice that number, plus their new dreadnoughts." "Then what do you propose, Captain?" Navari asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "A preemptive strike," Wright replied without hesitation. "My battleship division, supported by whatever Alliance vessels can be made combat-ready in the next 48 hours. We hit them at their staging area in the Taurus Reach before they can mobilize." "Another Thunder Run?" Zolar asked. Wright shook her head. "The Vex will have adapted to that tactic. No, this requires something new." She turned to Admiral Navari. "I need full operational autonomy and authorization to deploy all weapon systems at my discretion." The chamber erupted in protest. "Absolutely not. Unacceptable. This human cannot be trusted with such authority." Admiral Navari raised her arms again for silence. "Captain Wright, you're essentially asking the Alliance to grant you carte blanche to use weapons of mass destruction." "I'm asking for the authority to make tactical decisions in the field without committee approval," Wright corrected. "The Vex don't hold council meetings in the middle of battle. Neither should we." Ambassador Delaney stepped forward. "Perhaps a compromise?" Captain Wright receives provisional authority, with Ambassador Zolar remaining aboard the Thunderchild as Alliance liaison. Any deployment of unconventional weapons requires his concurrence. All eyes turned to Zolar, who maintained a carefully neutral expression despite his surprise. The proposal placed an enormous responsibility on his shoulders. "I believe that arrangement could work," he said cautiously. "Captain Wright and I have established a functional working relationship, and I understand both Alliance protocols and the urgency of the situation." Admiral Navari considered this, her compound eyes studying both Wright and Zolar. "Very well," she decided finally. "Captain Wright, you will have your operational autonomy, subject to Ambassador Zolar's oversight regarding special weapons deployment. The Alliance will provide whatever support vessels can be made ready within your timeframe." Wright nodded, satisfaction evident in her posture if not her expression. "We deploy in 24 hours. I'll transmit tactical requirements to Alliance Command immediately." As the council session disbanded into smaller, urgent conversations, Zolar approached Wright. "You manipulated them quite effectively," he observed quietly. Wright raised an eyebrow. "I told them the truth. The Vex are planning an offensive against the Proxima Relay." "Yes, but you used that truth to secure exactly what you wanted, operational autonomy." A ghost of a smile crossed Wright's scarred face. "Politics and warfare aren't so different, Ambassador. Both require recognizing the right moment to strike." Her expression grew serious. "The real question is, will you actually approve the use of our special weapons when the time comes? Because make no mistake, against these new Vex dreadnoughts, we'll need everything in our arsenal." Zolar met her gaze steadily. "I will do what serves the greater good, Captain. Neither more nor less." "Fair enough," Wright nodded. "I can work with that." She glanced at the departing council members. "They fear us, you know. Not just our weapons, but our unpredictability. With good reason, Zolar replied. In the short time I've spent among humans, I've learned that you are indeed unpredictable, sometimes even to yourselves. Wright laughed, a surprisingly warm sound from such a hardened warrior. That's our secret weapon, Ambassador. The one thing the Vex can never counter. 48 hours later, the combined Human Alliance fleet approached the Taurus Reach. The region of space, a dense cluster of young stars surrounded by radiation clouds and asteroid fields, had been identified as the Vex staging area for their planned offensive. The fleet moved in silence, running dark to avoid early detection. The human battleships led the formation, their massive hulls absorbing ambient radiation that would have damaged the more sensitive Alliance vessels. Behind them, 28 Alliance cruisers and frigates maintained perfect formation, weapons primed but powered down to minimize energy signatures. Aboard the Thunderchild, the atmosphere was tense but focused. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, preparing for what promised to be the most significant engagement of the war thus far. On the command deck, Captain Wright studied the tactical display with Commander Petrova and Lieutenant Commander Jackson. Ambassador Zolar stood nearby, observing. Thermal and quantum scans confirm massive Vex activity, Jackson reported. We're detecting at least 60 vessels, including 5 of the new Dreadnought class. Wright frowned. More than expected. What's the status of their fleet? Still in staging configuration. They haven't detected us yet. Good. Wright straightened, decision made. We proceed with Operation Firestorm. Transmit final coordinates to all vessels. Zolar stepped forward. Captain, you haven't briefed me on the details of this operation. Wright met his gaze directly. Because you wouldn't approve it. But given what we're facing, I need every advantage. What exactly are you planning? Zolar demanded, a sense of foreboding settling over him. Instead of answering, Wright addressed her crew. All hands, battle stations. Initiate full combat protocols. Engineering, prepare the Nova package for deployment. Alarm flashed across Zolar's face. Nova? Captain, what is this weapon? Commander Petrova, brief the ambassador while I coordinate with the other vessels, Wright ordered, moving to the communication station. Petrova led Zolar to a secondary display. The Nova system is a quantum-enhanced nuclear device, she explained in a low voice. It's designed to trigger an artificial supernova effect, contained within a quantum bubble. Zolar stared at her in horror. You're going to create a star explosion? A controlled one, Petrova emphasized. The quantum bubble contains the blast effect within a predefined radius, in this case, the current position of the Vex fleet. It won't expand beyond those parameters. This is madness, Zolar whispered. The destructive potential is precisely what we need against those new dreadnoughts, Petrova interrupted. Our intelligence indicates they're equipped with planetary decimation weapons. If they reach populated systems, billions will die. And you expect me to authorize this? Zolar asked incredulously. No, Wright said, rejoining them. I expect you to recognize the necessity of it. This isn't about following conventions anymore, Ambassador. It's about survival. Zolar's mind raced. The Nova system far exceeded anything he had imagined humans capable of developing. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a controlled cataclysm. To authorize its use would set a dangerous precedent, but to refuse might doom the Alliance to defeat. There must be alternatives, he insisted. We've run 17 different battle simulations, Wright replied, her tone leaving no room for debate. In every scenario where we don't deploy Nova, we lose over 80% of our fleet and fail to stop the Vex advance. Those new dreadnoughts are specifically designed to counter our conventional tactics. Captain, Jackson called out suddenly, we're being scanned. Vex sensors have detected our approach. Wright's expression hardened. Time's up, Ambassador. I need your decision now. Zolar looked at the tactical display, at the massive Vex fleet preparing for their genocidal mission. He thought of the billions of lives across dozens of worlds that would be extinguished if these vessels reached their targets. Then he thought of the precedent this would set, weaponizing the power of stars themselves. Vex fleet is powering up weapon systems. Jackson reported urgently. They're moving to combat formation. Ambassador? Wright pressed. Zolar closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with new resolve. I authorized the deployment of the Nova system, under protest and only for this specific engagement. Wright nodded, relief briefly visible before her command mask returned. Acknowledged. Communications, inform all Alliance vessels to assume defensive positions behind our battleships. Engineering, begin Nova deployment sequence. The command deck sprang into coordinated activity. Warning indicators flashed as the Thunderchild's most devastating weapon system came online. All ships report ready, Captain, Petrova announced. Nova package primed and targeting solutions locked. Wright settled into her command chair, her expression grim but determined. Deploy countermeasures. All hands, prepare for extreme radiation and gravitational distortion. The ship shuddered as specialized probes launched from its underside, racing toward the center of the Vex formation. Probes will reach optimal position in 30 seconds, Jackson reported. Vex vessels are moving to intercept, but they won't reach them in time. Wright opened a channel to the entire fleet. All vessels, this is Captain Wright. Engage emergency shields and maintain your positions. This ends now. She turned to her weapons officer. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, execute Nova. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, at the center of the Vex formation, a pinpoint of impossibly bright light appeared. It expanded rapidly, a miniature star being born in the void. The quantum bubble containing it was visible as a shimmer in space, a perfect sphere enclosing the growing inferno. Within seconds, the lead Vex vessels were engulfed in the artificial supernova. Their hulls, designed to withstand conventional weapons, offered no protection against the fundamental forces of stellar creation. They disintegrated instantly, atomic bonds sheared apart by the overwhelming energy. The Thunderchild rocked violently as gravitational waves washed over the fleet. Emergency alarms blared throughout the ship as systems strained against forces they were never designed to withstand. Structural integrity at 62% and falling, Petrova reported, her voice tight with tension. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Emergency teams responding. Maintain position, Wright ordered. The quantum bubble is holding. On the view screen, the Nova effect continued to expand within its containment field, consuming Vex vessel after Vex vessel. The few ships at the edges of their formation attempted to flee, but the human battleships opened fire with conventional weapons, preventing their escape. Radiation levels exceeding safe parameters, Jackson warned. Medical is reporting casualties from exposure. Wright's expression didn't change, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped her chair. Divert additional power to radiation shielding. How long until the Nova effect dissipates? 2 minutes, 17 seconds, Petrova answered, studying her readings. But Captain, at current radiation levels, will sustain critical damage to organic tissue before then. Zolar watched in horrified fascination as the artificial supernova consumed the Vex fleet. The raw destructive power was unlike anything he had ever witnessed, a weapon that harnessed the most fundamental forces of the universe itself. Engineering reports reactor instability, Jackson called out, real fear edging into his voice for the first time. The Nova effect is causing feedback in our power systems. Wright made an instant decision. All vessels, emergency withdrawal. Maximum thrust, get clear of the gravitational distortion. The Thunderchild shuddered as its engines strained against the growing gravitational field generated by the Nova effect. Across the fleet, ships fought to break free of the invisible forces pulling them toward the artificial cataclysm. "We're losing the Defiant," Petrova reported urgently. "Their engines have failed, they're being drawn back toward the event horizon." "Damn it," Wright snarled. She punched her communications control. "Relentless, indomitable, lock tractor beams on the Defiant. Pull them out." Two human battleships veered back toward their stricken sister ship, energy beams lancing out to latch onto the drifting vessel. The strain was immediately visible as their own hulls began to buckle under the combined gravitational forces. "They can't hold it," Jackson warned. "The structural integrity of all three ships is failing." Wright's face contorted with anguish, the first real emotion Zolar had seen her display. "Order the Defiant to abandon ship. Get as many people off as possible." Escape pods began launching from the stricken battleship, tiny flashes of light against the overwhelming brilliance of the nova effect. Many made it clear, racing toward the retreating fleet. Others were caught in the gravitational pull, dragged back toward annihilation. Zolar watched in silence, understanding for the first time the true price of victory in human terms. The Defiant had a crew of nearly 2,000. How many were escaping? How many were being sacrificed to ensure the mission's success? "The nova effect is reaching critical instability," Petrova reported, her voice clinical despite the tragedy unfolding before them. "The quantum bubble is beginning to degrade. All vessels, maximum thrust." Wright ordered. "Get clear of the blast radius now." The Thunderchild surged forward, its engines pushed beyond safe operational parameters. Throughout the ship, systems failed, circuits overloaded, and hull plates buckled under the strain. Behind them, the quantum bubble containing the nova effect finally collapsed. The artificial supernova, no longer constrained, expanded explosively for a brief, catastrophic moment before the vacuum of space extinguished it. The resulting shockwave raced outward, catching the trailing edge of the retreating fleet. The Thunderchild rode the wave like a ship in a storm, alarms blaring as damage reports flooded in from every section. On the command deck, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, throwing crew members to the deck. Emergency lighting flickered on as primary systems failed. Zolar picked himself up from where he'd been thrown, ears ringing from the cacophony of alarms. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw Wright still in her command chair, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead as she continued issuing orders. "Damage report. All stations." Commander Petrova struggled back to her station, cradling what appeared to be a broken arm. "Hull breaches on decks 3 through 12. Life support at 47% capacity. Engineering reports critical damage to the main reactor." "Casualties?" Wright demanded. "Medical is overwhelmed. Current estimate is over 300 injured, unknown number of fatalities." Wright absorbed this with a grim nod. "And the fleet?" Lieutenant Commander Jackson, his uniform scorched and his face smeared with soot, checked his partially functioning console. "Alliance vessels report heavy damage but no complete losses. Of our battleships, the Defiant is gone. The Relentless and Indomitable sustained critical damage but are still operational. The Thunderchild, Valiant, Dauntless, and Resolute are combat ineffective but salvageable." "And the Vex?" Wright asked, her voice growing hoarse from the smoke. Jackson's expression shifted to one of grim satisfaction. "Complete destruction of their fleet. No survivors detected." A heavy silence fell over the command deck, broken only by the continuing alarms and the groans of the injured. They had achieved victory, but at a terrible cost. Zolar approached Wright, helping her stanch the blood from her head wound with a cloth. "Was it worth it, Captain?" he asked quietly. "The Defiant. All those lives." Wright met his gaze, her eyes haunted but resolute. "Ask me again when we know the final count. Ask me again when we've confirmed the Vex can no longer threaten civilian worlds." She looked around at her damaged ship, at her injured crew. War isn't about worth, Ambassador. It's about necessity. Sometimes the price of victory is measured in the lives of those you're sworn to protect. As medical teams finally reached the command deck and began treating the wounded, Zolar gazed out at the starfield where the Vex fleet had been. Nothing remained, no debris, no radiation signature, nothing but empty space. The Nova system had not just destroyed the enemy, it had erased them from existence. The price of victory, indeed. But as he watched the human crew working tirelessly to save their ship and each other, he wondered if there wasn't another cost being calculated, the cost to humanity's soul. These weapons, these tactics, they were changing the humans, forcing them to become something darker, more ruthless. And when the war was over, would they be able to step back from that edge? Or had the Alliance unleashed something it could never again contain? New rules of engagement. The medical bay of the Thunderchild was overcrowded with injured crew members. 3 days after the battle at Taurus Reach, the human battleship limped toward the Alliance repair facility at Arcturus Station, its hull patched with emergency sealant and its systems running on backup power. The ship that had once been the pride of Earth's fleet now resembled a wounded beast, struggling to remain functional. Captain Eleanor Wright moved slowly between the rows of wounded, stopping to speak with each crew member, offering words of encouragement or simply a reassuring touch on the shoulder. Her own injuries, a concussion, 3 cracked ribs, and a laceration that ran from forehead to cheek, had been hastily treated, but she had refused more comprehensive medical attention until all her crew were cared for. Dr. Nathaniel Chen, the Thunderchild's chief medical officer, approached her with a data tablet. His surgical scrubs were stained with blood of various colors, human red, but also the blue-green of Alliance medical personnel who had transferred aboard to assist with casualties. "Captain," he greeted her, fatigue evident in his voice. "You should be resting." Wright dismissed his concern with a slight shake of her head, immediately regretting the movement as pain flared behind her eyes. "Status report, Doctor." Chen sighed, knowing better than to argue. Final casualty count stands at 387 injured, 42 confirmed dead, 15 still unaccounted for and presumed lost during hull breaches. He paused, the weight of each number evident in his expression. "We lost engineering teams 3 and 7 completely when the reactor shielding failed." Wright absorbed this with a grim nod. "And the Defiant?" Alliance rescue vessels recovered 843 survivors from escape pods. Approximately 1,100 crew members were lost with the ship. Chen's voice cracked slightly. He had friends aboard the Defiant, colleagues he had trained with. Wright closed her eyes briefly, the names and faces of the Defiant's command staff flashing through her mind. Captain Hernandez. Commander Wu. Lieutenant Okafor. Good officers. Friends. Gone. The relentless and indomitable, she asked, forcing herself to continue. Both suffered critical damage but are space-worthy. They've assumed escort positions around us. Combined casualties on both vessels number approximately 500, with 76 confirmed fatalities. Wright nodded, filing away each number, each loss. Later, when she was alone, she would allow herself to feel the full weight of them. For now, she needed to remain strong for those who survived. "Captain," Chen said hesitantly, "there's something else you should know. We've been instructed to proceed directly to Arcturus Station without stopping at the Alliance medical facility at Proxima 4. Admiral Navari has called for an immediate war council upon our arrival." Wright frowned. "We have critically wounded crew who need specialized care. I've made that argument." Alliance command was unresponsive. Before Wright could reply, the ship's intercom activated. "Captain Wright to the command deck," Commander Petrova's voice announced. "Priority communication from Admiral Navari." "On my way," Wright responded automatically. She turned back to Chen. Do what you can for them, Doctor. I'll sort this out. The corridors of the Thunderchild bore the scars of battle, exposed wiring, buckled floor plates, scorched bulkheads. Repair crews worked around the clock, but the damage was extensive. Wright noted each broken system, each wounded crew member, cataloging them in her mind alongside the casualty reports. The price of victory continued to rise. When she reached the command deck, she found it in marginally better condition than the rest of the ship. Essential systems had been prioritized for repair, and the main viewscreen functioned well enough to display Admiral Navari's crystalline features. Captain Wright, the Admiral greeted her, compound eyes taking in the human's battered appearance. You look terrible. Thank you, Admiral, Wright replied dryly. What can I do for you? You can explain why you deployed a weapon capable of creating an artificial supernova without proper Alliance authorization. Navari's mandibles clicked in agitation. The quantum distortions from your Nova device are still detectable across 3 sectors. You've violated at least 30 provisions of the Galactic Warfare Conventions. Wright felt a surge of anger, quickly suppressed. Ambassador Zolar provided authorization as per our agreement. Under duress, and without full knowledge of the weapon's capabilities. I saved the Alliance from annihilation, Wright countered, fatigue making her tone sharper than intended. Those Vex dreadnoughts would have reached the core worlds within days. Billions would have died. Perhaps, Navari conceded. But the Council is concerned about the precedent this sets. First the Prometheus system, now Nova. What other apocalyptic weapons are you humans hiding? Wright met the alien's gaze steadily. With respect, Admiral, that's classified information. Not anymore. Navari's antennae flattened against her head. Upon arrival at Arcturus Station, your vessel will be subject to a complete inspection. All weapon systems will be documented and assessed for compliance with Alliance protocols. That's a violation of Earth's sovereignty, Wright protested. The Thunderchild is an Earth military vessel. A vessel that just demonstrated the ability to create localized supernovas, Navari countered. The Council has voted unanimously on this matter, Captain. Earth's representative included. Wright's exhaustion and pain gave way to cold anger. My crew requires immediate medical attention. Many won't survive the journey to Arcturus without specialized care. Medical ships will rendezvous with you en route, Navari said, her tone softening slightly. But the Thunderchild and its sister ships will proceed directly to Arcturus as ordered. The transmission ended before Wright could respond, leaving her staring at a blank screen. She leaned heavily against a console, the adrenaline that had sustained her for days finally ebbing away. Captain? Commander Petrova approached cautiously. Her broken arm was now properly set and encased in a medical brace. Your orders? Wright straightened with effort. Inform the Relentless and Indomitable of our new course. Then get me a secure channel to Earth Fleet Command. Admiral Reeves needs to know what's happening. And the inspection? Petrova asked quietly. Wright's expression hardened. We'll cross that particular minefield when we reach it, Commander. Ambassador Zolar stood on the observation deck of Arcturus Station, watching as the damaged human battleships docked. The massive vessels looked like ancient sea creatures, their hulls scarred and scorched, improvised repairs visible across their surfaces. Despite their condition, there was something indomitable about them, a quality that seemed to extend to their human crews. Quite a sight, aren't they? Ambassador Delaney joined him at the viewport. Even wounded, they command respect. They command fear, Zolar corrected. The Council is in an uproar over the Nova device. Many are calling for the immediate disarmament of all human vessels. Delaney smiled thinly. A gesture more symbolic than practical. Even if we removed every weapon from those ships, the humans would simply improvise new ones. It's their nature. Perhaps, Zolar conceded. But something must be done. These weapons, Prometheus, Nova, they change the very nature of warfare. They're too dangerous to remain unregulated. And yet, they saved the Alliance, Delaney pointed out. Without them, we'd be discussing the fall of our civilization rather than arms limitations. Before Zolar could respond, his communication device chimed. The council session is beginning, he noted. Captain Wright has been summoned to testify. This should be interesting, Delaney murmured. Wright isn't known for her diplomatic skills. The two ambassadors made their way to the council chamber, a vast circular room at the heart of Arcturus Station. Representatives from all Alliance species had gathered, their disparate forms filling the tiered seating around a central platform. Admiral Navari presided from a raised dais, her crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the chamber's lighting in prismatic patterns. Captain Eleanor Wright stood on the central platform, still wearing her battle-damaged uniform. She had refused medical regeneration for her facial laceration, and the angry red line across her features gave her a fierce appearance. Ambassador Zolar noted that she stood perfectly at attention despite her injuries, a soldier to the core. Captain Eleanor Wright, Admiral Navari began formally, "You have been called before this council to explain your actions at the Battle of Taurus Reach, specifically your deployment of the weapon designated Nova, without proper authorization." Wright's expression remained neutral. "I received authorization from Ambassador Zolar, as stipulated in our agreement." All eyes turned briefly to Zolar, who shifted uncomfortably. "The captain is technically correct," he acknowledged. "However, I was not fully briefed on the nature or capabilities of the weapon." A rather significant omission, noted Councillor Treesnax, the Medusan delegate. His gelatinous form pulsed with agitation. The Nova device created an artificial stellar event. The quantum echoes are still disrupting navigation in 3 sectors. The alternative was allowing Vex dreadnoughts with planet-killing capabilities to reach populated systems, Wright responded calmly. "I made a tactical decision based on the immediate threat. And destroyed an entire fleet in the process," General Vrexel rumbled. "Along with any chance of capturing intact Vex technology or prisoners for interrogation." Wright's composure cracked slightly. "We lost over 1,000 of our own people in that engagement, General. The Defiant and her crew sacrificed themselves to ensure the mission's success. Don't talk to me about lost opportunities." A murmur ran through the chamber at her sharp response. Alliance officers would never address a superior so directly. Admiral Navari raised all 4 arms for silence. "The loss of the Defiant was indeed tragic, Captain, and the Alliance recognizes the sacrifice of her crew. But that doesn't change the fact that humanity has now demonstrated possession of at least 2 weapon systems that violate established conventions. Conventions established before the Vex threat," Wright pointed out. "Before we faced an enemy willing to exterminate entire planets." "An argument with merit," acknowledged Councillor Swax, the Serpentine Ophidian representative. "But it raises a troubling question: what happens when this conflict ends? Will humanity retain these weapons? And if so, what assurance does the Alliance have that they won't be used against us in some future disagreement?" The chamber fell silent. It was the question that had hovered unspoken since the deployment of the Prometheus system, the fear that lurked behind all diplomatic niceties. Wright surveyed the chamber slowly, meeting the gaze of each council member in turn. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the silent room. "Humanity developed these weapons for one purpose: survival. We were fighting wars among ourselves long before we reached the stars. We know the cost of conflict better than most species in this alliance." She paused, wincing slightly as she shifted her weight. "But we also know the cost of unpreparedness. When the Vex attacked the outer colonies, the Alliance response was measured, proportional, and completely ineffective. Billions died while committees debated appropriate levels of force. You suggest we should have immediately resorted to weapons of mass destruction? Treesnax demanded. I suggest that when facing an enemy intent on genocide, proportional response is a luxury we couldn't afford, Wright countered. The Vex didn't recognize your conventions. They didn't respect your diplomatic overtures. They understood only one thing: superior force. And now they are gone, Admiral Navari stated flatly. Erased from existence by your Nova device. The question remains, what do we do about humanity's arsenal? Before Wright could respond, the chamber doors slid open. Admiral Darius Reeves entered, accompanied by a team of human officers and, surprisingly, 3 Vex. The council erupted in chaos. Security personnel rushed forward, weapons drawn. Representatives shouted warnings and threats. Admiral Navari's crystalline form practically vibrated with alarm. Hold! Reeves's voice cut through the pandemonium. These Vex are under Earth protection. They come as emissaries, not combatants. Gradually, order was restored, though security remained on high alert. The 3 Vex, tall, insectoid creatures with iridescent carapaces and compound eyes, stood impassively beside Reeves, seemingly unconcerned by the hostility directed toward them. Admiral Reeves, Navari addressed him, her voice tight with controlled anger, explain yourself immediately. Reeves stepped forward, his weathered face grave. The fleet we destroyed at Taurus Reach was not the entirety of the Vex force. It was merely the vanguard, the most aggressive faction of their species, commanded by a warmind designated Annihilator. Impossible, General Vrexel objected. Our intelligence indicated. Your intelligence was incomplete, Reeves interrupted. When the Nova device detonated, it created a quantum distortion that resonated across all Vex communication networks. This disruption allowed a different Vex faction, one that had opposed the war from the beginning, to seize control from the Annihilator caste. One of the Vex stepped forward. Unlike the soldiers encountered in battle, this one had additional appendages and more complex patterns on its carapace. When it spoke, its voice was a harmonious blend of clicks and whistles, translated by a device on its thorax. I am Nexus Harmonizer 7, it introduced itself. Speaker for the Vex Conclave of Mutual Existence. The entity you knew as the Vex was not our true collective, but a splinter faction controlled by a corrupted warmind. For generations, we fought an internal war against the Annihilator caste, but their control of our quantum network prevented us from succeeding. The council chamber remained utterly silent as the alien continued. The human weapon, what you call Nova, created a quantum disruption unlike anything we had encountered. This disruption severed the Annihilator's control of our collective consciousness. We are grateful. The Vex compound eyes shifted toward Captain Wright. Your destructive capacity is remarkable. In destroying our corrupted elements, you have freed us. Wright stared at the Vex, her expression a complex mixture of surprise, suspicion, and cautious hope. You're saying we inadvertently helped you overthrow your own warmongers? Precisely, Nexus Harmonizer 7 confirmed. The Conclave now controls all remaining Vex forces. We seek peaceful integration with the galactic community, not conquest. Admiral Navari's antennae twitched skeptically. How convenient. And we're expected to believe this sudden change of heart? It is not a change of heart, but a change of leadership, the Vex corrected. As evidence of our sincerity, we offer complete withdrawal from all contested territories and reparations for worlds damaged during the conflict. Reeves stepped forward again. Earth has already entered preliminary negotiations with the Vex Conclave. They've provided detailed intelligence on remaining Annihilator loyalists and assisted in neutralizing them. Without consulting the Alliance Council? Navari demanded. Time was of the essence, Reeves replied unapologetically. And frankly, Admiral, after your treatment of Captain Wright and her crew, Earth wasn't feeling particularly collaborative. The chamber erupted in renewed argument, voices rising as accusations and counter-accusations flew across the room. Through it all, Captain Wright remained silent, studying the Vex representatives with the calculating gaze of a career soldier assessing potential allies, or enemies. Ambassador Zolar moved to her side. "What do you make of this?" he asked quietly. Wright's lips curved in a slight smile. "I think humanity just changed the rules of engagement again. Not through our weapons this time, but through diplomacy." "You believe their story?" "I believe Reeves wouldn't have brought them here if he wasn't reasonably confident they were genuine," Wright replied. "And frankly, a peaceful resolution beats the alternative." Zolar considered this. "You sound almost disappointed, Captain. No more battles to fight?" Wright's expression sobered. "There are always more battles, Ambassador. They just take different forms." She glanced toward Admiral Navari, still arguing heatedly with Reeves. "Like the one that's about to unfold here." Indeed, as the initial shock subsided, the Council began debating the implications of this new development. Some representatives advocated immediate acceptance of the Vex peace offer, others insisted on caution and extensive verification. Through it all, a new dynamic was emerging, an unspoken acknowledgement that humanity had irrevocably changed the balance of power within the Alliance. Their weapons might have violated conventions, but they had also ended a war that conventional approaches could not. Admiral Navari finally called for order. "This council will recess to consider these developments," she announced. "In the meantime, Captain Wright and Admiral Reeves are instructed to provide full documentation on all weapon systems deployed during this conflict." Reeves stepped forward. "Earth is prepared to share technical specifications on the Prometheus system as a gesture of good faith," he said carefully. "The Nova technology, however, remains classified pending further diplomatic arrangements." "That is unacceptable," Councillor Treesnax objected. "The Alliance cannot permit any member species to maintain weapons of such destructive capacity without oversight." "With respect, Councillor," Wright interjected, "Earth developed these weapons independently, using our own resources and technology. They remain under Earth jurisdiction unless and until our government agrees otherwise." The underlying message was clear: humanity would not surrender its technological advantages, not even to its allies. "Perhaps," Ambassador Delaney suggested smoothly, stepping into the growing tension, "a compromise can be reached. Earth could agree to certain usage protocols and deployment restrictions, while maintaining control of the technology itself." Zolar saw the strategy unfolding, a classic diplomatic maneuver. Offer a concession on procedure while yielding nothing of substance. The humans were better at this game than most gave them credit for. "A joint oversight committee," he suggested, building on Delaney's proposal. "With representatives from Earth and the Alliance, to establish clear guidelines for when and how these weapons may be deployed in future conflicts." Admiral Navari considered this, her compound eyes studying the human contingent. "Your government would agree to such restrictions?" "Provided Earth maintains technological sovereignty, yes," Reeves confirmed. "We have no desire to be the galaxy's destroyers, Admiral. But neither will we leave ourselves vulnerable to future threats." As the negotiations continued, Captain Wright quietly withdrew from the chamber. Zolar followed her into the corridor outside, where she leaned heavily against the wall, the strain of her injuries finally evident in her posture. "You should be in medical," he observed. Wright shook her head slightly. "Later. I needed to see this through. The politics of peace can be as treacherous as warfare," Zolar noted. "Perhaps more so." "That's Reeves's battlefield, not mine." Wright straightened with visible effort. "I just want to get my ship repaired and my crew taken care of." "And then?" Wright's gaze turned distant. "Then we return to our original mission. Exploration. Diplomacy. The peaceful stuff that gets interrupted by wars." You don't sound entirely enthusiastic about that prospect, Captain. A ghost of a smile crossed Wright's scarred features. Old soldiers are creatures of habit, Ambassador. We're trained for conflict, not cocktail parties. And yet, you may have helped forge a peace that will last generations, Zolar observed. The Vex Conclave seems genuinely interested in cooperation. For now, Wright nodded. But the galaxy is a big place, full of unknown threats. Sooner or later, humanity will be called upon again. And the weapons? Nova? Prometheus? Wright met his gaze directly. They remain in our arsenal, but not as first options. Never as first options. She pushed away from the wall, wincing slightly. The true lesson of this war isn't about our destructive capacity, Ambassador. It's about knowing when to use it, and when not to. 3 months later, the Thunderchild departed Arcturus Station. Its hull had been repaired, its systems upgraded, its crew roster filled with new faces to replace those lost at Taurus Reach. Captain Eleanor Wright stood on the command deck, surveying her refurbished ship with quiet satisfaction. The war had changed much in the galaxy. The Vex Conclave had been formally recognized by the Alliance Council, with diplomatic relations established and trade negotiations underway. Earth had secured a more prominent position within Alliance governance, their military contributions impossible to ignore after the decisive victory at Taurus Reach. But the war had changed the humans, too. The deployment of weapons like Prometheus and Nova had forced them to confront difficult questions about their role in the galactic community. Were they protectors? Destroyers? Something in between? Captain, we're cleared for departure, Commander Petrova reported, her arm now fully healed. Course laid in for the Antares sector as ordered. Wright nodded. Proceed, Commander. As the Thunderchild pulled away from the station, Wright noticed a lone figure on the observation deck, the tall, slender form of Ambassador Zolar, watching their departure. She raised a hand in farewell, and after a moment's hesitation, he returned the gesture. Their mission had changed. No longer were they hunting Vex warships or defending colony worlds. Now they would escort diplomatic vessels, establish communication with new species, help integrate the peaceful Vex into the wider community. It was, by any objective measure, a better assignment. And yet, as the Thunderchild accelerated toward open space, Wright couldn't help but wonder what new threats waited beyond the frontier. Human battleships had proven too dangerous for one war, but the galaxy was ancient and vast, filled with unknown perils. Lieutenant Commander Jackson approached, interrupting her thoughts. Course locked in, Captain. Engineering reports all systems nominal. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander, Wright replied. Maintain standard patrol speed until we clear Alliance space. And then? Wright smiled, the expression pulling at her new scar, a permanent reminder of the price paid for victory. And then we see what's out there. Preferably without having to blow it up. As the Thunderchild accelerated to cruising speed, Wright studied the stars on the view screen. The great human battleships had changed the rules of engagement in this war, demonstrating destructive capabilities that had both terrified and saved their allies. They had been too dangerous by conventional standards, too unpredictable, too human. But in a galaxy full of threats both known and unknown, perhaps that was exactly what was needed, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as protectors willing to cross lines others wouldn't, to ensure the survival of not just humanity, but all sentient life. The Thunderchild entered hyperspace, vanishing from normal space in a flash of light. Its mission had changed, but its purpose remained the same, to explore, to protect, and when necessary, to fight with all the ingenuity and determination that made humans both feared and respected throughout the stars. Human battleships might be too dangerous for conventional warfare, but in an unconventional galaxy, they were perhaps the perfect guardians, powerful enough to defend, restrained enough not to conquer, and unpredictable enough to make potential enemies think twice before provoking them. As Captain Eleanor Wright settled into the rhythm of her restored command, she knew that balance would define humanity's future among the stars, the delicate equilibrium between the capacity for destruction and the commitment to protection. It was, she reflected, a uniquely human paradox. And perhaps that was their greatest strength of all.